Former President Joe Biden was apparently in serious decline during the last years of his administration. Special counsel Robert Hur was criticized for calling him a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory, but that description seems more than apt. Biden was shielded by his aides, family, and some would argue by the media. So, Luke, how can we avoid a situation in the future where we have a president with some cognitive decline?
Well, one thing I've seen in my classes, which is interesting, is a strong interest in talking about age limits for the presidency. We've had two old presidents, and they're both unpopular. So I understand where that perspective is coming from. Constitutional amendments are very difficult to pass, but that's certainly an option. Cognitive tests were talked about, particularly during the first Trump administration. I don't think that's a good idea. It's counterproductive and problematic for millions of people who have various disabilities. So I wouldn't go down that road. But this whole theory that's come out in terms of the recent book of a cover-up, I want to push back on that a little bit. I understand that, sure, Biden's family and his aides tried to politically put him in the best position possible to claim credit and deflect blame, and that's what those people do on both sides of the aisle. The idea that anybody successfully covered up anything, I'm very skeptical of. He started with a 50% approval rating that quickly cratered to 40%, which was, historically unpopular and on par with some of the lowest contemporary presidents we've had. So for a cover-up, I think you need to successfully convince people of something that doesn't exist. And I think ultimately we saw electoral accountability, and the system took care of that issue to the extent that the problem was there.
Right, but if there is a problem and during the course of the administration, that can have an impact on decisions that have to be made and critical decisions in short time frames.
And there's constitutional procedures that are followed if the president's incapable.
Tara?
Part of the problem is that, and I have not read the book, but part of the questioning about the book is there doesn't seem to be one specific moment that is identified where Biden was incapable of making a presidential decision that he needed to make. And that's part of the problem. And certainly you're quite correct, Luke. If there is a case where, okay, the president was incapable of, picking up the red phone or something like that, we do have a system for dealing with that. But when you simply say, okay, the president was a little slower, he could only have meetings midday, okay, that's not great, it's not ideal, he wasn't having cabinet meetings. Again, all of these things are not ideal, not what we want, but they don't show that he wasn't capable of doing the job.
Yeah, and I think that the people closest to him, advising him, were confident enough to put him in a debate with Trump. That does not show that they knew that there was a significant problem. Things happen incrementally, cognitively, and it looks very similar like sleep deprivation. So the fact that you had people close to him, seeing him day to day, and it was a very slow decay or issues with cognitive functioning and or sleep deprivation that the job of the presidency has on every single president. We can even look at Reagan, who some argue that he had Alzheimer's in his final years of his presidency. He definitely had it when he was no longer president. So we have had issues like this in the past, and it is something that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, Woodrow Wilson comes to mind, right? You're our historian on the panel this week, right? Woodrow Wilson.
He had a stroke, and people surmised it, and I'm sure the people immediately around him knew that much of what was happening in his last year or so of his presidency was basically his wife running the country.
Although that was before the age of intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Yeah, we have the 25th Amendment to deal with an incapacitated president, and I agree with Tara. This is not a dichotomy where either he was fully there and fully capable or completely incapable. You can have a few mental lapses in acuity, as Ben said. This was a campaign liability, and we saw what happened with that, for sure, but it wasn't a national security liability. And I think one of the reasons you're seeing the Trump administration focus on it so much and sort of ratchet this up to 11 is right now there's a really important debate in Congress to try to get this bill that Trump wants to get passed through the Senate. And the more he starts launching DOJ investigations into some supposed cover-up, the more there's an attention on, was Biden fully there, and a little bit less on the challenges he's having in terms of getting a bill through the legislature. I think fundamentally, the question we should be asking ourselves is why are we not talking about how massively deranged it is that our current president seems to suggest that President Biden was a robotic clone, right? So this is a classic example of Trump where there's a reasonable point to be made that Biden was having some mental lapses and probably shouldn't have been a candidate. And instead, he starts mongering in conspiracy theories, which get a lot of attention, but it's absolutely like, what are we talking about? Why is the President of the United States retweeting an idea that President Biden was a robot? I mean, going back to AI.
This is the political world we're in now. Both sides. It's not just Trump. It is on both sides where the extreme polarized approach is taken to try to bring in their base, and it's us versus them.
Well, I don't know about other Democratic presidents tweeting about, robotic clones, and I mean, President Trump does tend to, things will circulate and the fever swamp, if you want to call it that, and on social media, and he likes to. I mean, he's trying to be provocative. He likes to retweet those things. He doesn't say them himself, but he retweets it.
Well, one thing I think that comes to mind, particularly with my background in elections, is nominate candidates who are younger. If you don't like older candidates and they're not popular, right, both sides, Republicans and Democrats, recruit younger candidates and then go to the primaries and vote for them, because we have such low turnout in our primaries that it tends to be older people who are more inclined to vote for older people, selecting older people. And then we said, oh, we have these old people, and old people are great, but there's some concerns about mental acuity when it comes to Biden and two historically old presidents. That's why I keep harping on the age.
Let's underline that. Old people are great.
Yeah, let's pick different candidates.
There is an effort within the Democratic Party right now to bring younger candidates in, because the old guard there is getting sclerotic.
Yeah, but as I tell my students, they're like, these people don't understand me. It's like, well, then go vote. You don't turn out the vote. That's why they're getting the nomination.